I would say curiosity, respect, humility are important traits.
How do you retain your best talent in the startup ecosystem? How do you identify what traits make somebody stand out? How do you keep them happy when maybe you can't offer them financial incentives? How do you keep them engaged so that they're doing their best work? And how do you handle all the awkward situations that come up as part of a scaling company and make sure the expectations are correct? In order to answer those questions, we've got Deputy Director of People at Smart Energy, Soumya Singh. She's also a lecturer at Kingston University, an angel investor, and sits at the board of multiple organizations. Thanks so much for coming on today. So tell us, how do you define and identify key talent?
Thanks, Amar. Thank you for having me. In terms of how we define talent, I think every organization will define talent slightly differently because you're relying on people to get things done. So that is, a very simple definition to go by. Who do you want? What capabilities you're after? Who can deliver your organizational objectives, your priorities, and you work backwards in terms of those typical profiles. The world of startups and scale ups, I think it's important to devote some time to define talent, because if you don't quite know who you are after, you won't have those people in the right roles who will do the job for you. So it's important to understand who you're after, devote some time to do that, and then go out in the market and get those people into those roles. So uh, definition of talent, however you define it, it's an important activity, it's an important process. It can be light touch, so I'm not saying you have to go to great lengths and have a team and whatnot. Just giving it some thought, especially if you are starting up. What is it that you're trying to achieve, and who will help you to achieve those objectives as an organization? I think that's a good starting point.
What's some of the key traits that people should be thinking about there? So could you give us some examples of maybe things that you've identified in the past when you're looking for talent?
Absolutely. I think the way I look at talent, it has to be two separate categories. So there has to be that technical competence. And by technical, I don't mean technology, it's your ability to do the core job. Whatever job you're doing, you need to have that capability in order to deliver. Especially, if we are talking about the startup world again, because there is no time, right? There is not much time to train people up. You want someone to come in and in a cliched way hit the ground running. So you need to have that core capability to deliver in that role. However, in my view, I think some of the traits that are important that will help you be successful, I think number one would be attitude. And again, it might sound a bit cliched, but that can do attitude. Leave it with me attitude. I'll. There's so many people who will articulate problems brilliantly and in a very sophisticated manner. There are very few people who will actually do something about the problem. So having that attitude is important. Being curious, to my mind, is very important, because if you're not curious, if you genuinely are not interested in what's happening around you and how you can be an active part of what's happening around you, you will end up just focusing on your core role. And often in smaller setups, especially, there is a big overlap between what one person does and what someone else in the team does. So you have to understand, okay, this is what we are trying to achieve collectively. This is my role in it, but how can I add value to some of the other things that are happening around me? So being curious, trying to understand what's happening around you. And I think the third one will have to be humility. So whatever you do, um, there has to be an element of humility and respect, because ultimately you're collaborating, you're working together, and very few people can claim to have all the qualities in them. all the traits in them to achieve things. It is about that collaboration. It is about coming together, working as a team, and what drives all of that is self-awareness and humility. So technical competence aside, you have to have these it sounds quite commonsensical, but if you don't have some of these qualities, it leads to conflict, and a lot of time gets wasted in trying to resolve conflicts, which were completely avoidable if only people knew that how to navigate some of these day-to-day challenges through the application of these qualities and traits. So I would say curiosity, respect, humility um, are important traits.
And let's say you find people who are like that, right? Who are delivering well for the company, they're a great team player. What are the levers you have to retain them, to keep them in, not only just keep them, but also keep them engaged so they're doing their best work?
That's a great question. I think engagement as a term is often misunderstood. Not everyone understands engagement, but we sort of are quick to roll out engagement surveys and whatnot. I think it's important for the leaders of the organization to first of all unpack the word engagement. Well, what does it mean? You absolutely can measure engagement. So it's not something that can't be measured. So that's the good news. But there is always this thing with engagement surveys. You very quickly fall into the trap of, let's have 30 standard off the shelf questions and then let's roll it out. And I don't think we need to take that approach necessarily. Of course, it helps to have some kind of a structure, but asking five important questions around motivation. What keeps your people motivated and happy in the workplace really is what engagement is all about. So crafting five meaningful questions, asking people. You don't even have to do a survey. Through your one-to-ones, people can take that temperature on what keeps you happy, what keeps you engaged, what keeps you motivated. And if you're regularly asking people those questions, I think you get that picture, and you're building that picture around, okay, this is what is important to my people. If I'm not, as an organization or as leadership team, if I'm not being able to provide whatever your people have identified, then there is that risk of people will leave. And with so many options available in the market, I think engagement and sort of treating engagement as an important driver in the workplace is very important. Often, we are so worried about organizational priorities and objectives that things like engagement, motivation, morale is just seen as soft or softer aspects. And I've seen, in my experience, I've seen where the intention was there, but there was never enough time to actually have these conversations. So I think it's important to understand what that means for your people. It's important to measure it. But I think what is even more important is to do something about it. So often people will measure engagement through these, very fancy engagement surveys, but will not do anything about it. And that's when it becomes into a disengagement survey. It's like a recipe where people will see, oh, I have given you this feedback, but you haven't really done anything about it. So I would say that's the structured approach to engagement. But some of the other levers that you can rely on, especially in a smaller setup, when you're starting up or when you're scaling up, is to have a degree of consistency. People do not like being treated inconsistently. They compare and despair, as they say. So having, even if it is some kind of a light touch system of process, policy, some kind of a system where you're tracking things, that will be appreciated. And often, I understand people will not have the time to put in place a very basic system. But trust me, if you don't have that kind of a structured, consistent approach, gradually as you're scaling up, you will see that, because of of a lack of that system, the it has led to discrepancies, and you don't want those kind of discrepancies, especially in your starting up years, because you want to treat people more or less in a consistent manner. It has to be equitable. The word equity is used often, but we don't necessarily connect it with day to day. So having some kind of a light touch system helps, because that contributes directly to that feeling of fairness, and feeling of fairness leads to people feeling motivated. And it's a little bit of that psychological contract, isn't it? Like, I have entered into this contract that I'm going to work for you, I'm going to give you my best as an individual, but there is something in exchange that I want from the organization, which is being treated fairly, that career progression, my personal development. But you need to have some kind of a system to make sure that the outcomes are equitable for everyone. And I think transparency will follow. So if you have a light touch system, you know, the outcomes are going to be fairer, they are going to be transparent, and you can defend some of the decisions that you're making on a day-to-day basis if challenged. So instead of waiting for people to challenge you on the decisions that you're making around career progression, around hiring, around who gets promoted, who gets developed, I think it's better to start with some kind of a system, whatever that looks like for you, around performance, around managing performance, around having those open and honest conversations, call it appraisal, call it development conversations, having some processes and policies in place. I'm not talking about a 500-page staff handbook, because not everyone will have the time to and often it never gets looked at. So I'm not suggesting that, but having something in place that will guide your decision making, uh, and making decisions on evidence is I think what people should remember, because people can see through your decision making. And even if you try and justify it, if it is not based on hard evidence and data, people won't buy it. So don't insult their intelligence. It's better to sort of have in place something that will enable you with the day-to-day management and day-to-day decision making, instead of waiting for that one person to call it out, and that's when you realize, oh, we made a mistake. So, and mistakes have consequences. So I think taking that proactive approach to engagement, using some of these levers, will help. It is time taking slightly, and you don't have to do everything. You can be quite creative, identify what works for you. I'm definitely not an advocate of copy and paste. So you have to think about what works for me, what's manageable, what's sustainable, what can easily scale up, and what I can stick to, in terms of guiding principles. So really, I'm talking about guiding principles. I'm not even talking about, fancy processes, policies, and systems, but I am definitely talking about guiding principles, because it is about equity, it is about respect, it is about showing that respect to people, and treating them with the care. Really, if you're calling them talent, the least you can do is to treat them with that care and respect. So those are some of, in my long-winded answer, those are some of the levers.
I'm Amma from the Bay HQ, and this episode is powered by HSBC Innovation Banking. If you enjoy this content, make sure you press subscribe, because that can keep us making more videos and more content just like this. So let's say that you've got great talent, and what you often hear is that people want like huge pay rises all the time, right? Or they have these certain demands. How do you know what boundaries to set with people? And let's say, when is the right time to give in to someone's demands to keep them there? And you're obviously getting the feedback of what they want. And sometimes maybe it's a case of actually that isn't right, and it's probably better to let somebody go than to maybe bend the rules that you have for the organization to keep them there. And what else could you potentially do to keep those people happy when sometimes their demands are more
That's
than
an
you're
excellent
capable of?
question. And in smaller setups, or when you're growing your organization, you will often come across these kind of demands around what's in it for me. I want to go to the next level and I can't wait. And you're rightly classifying that person as talent for your organization. But then how do you have that conversation around it's not the right time, or maybe there is someone else who I think needs to be promoted at this time, and that sort of a thing. So I think the starting point is again that system, uh, being clear on the remit and clarifying that remit with the individual. So often people will not necessarily work to their job description. It doesn't happen like that. Nobody works to their job description, and no job description in this world can actually, include every single, activity, task, responsibility that you do. But having some kind of a job description always helps, because that's when you can say, well, this is the scope of your role and this is where you are at now. Measuring that gap between this is the scope of your role, but you're definitely delivering above and beyond what is expected of you, and we want to recognize that, or we can't, we know that you're doing that, but unfortunately on this occasion we cannot do much about it, but let's talk about it in 6 months, requires a degree of confidence and requires a degree of honesty and requires a degree of authenticity. So I think if you can have that conversation with the individual who is making that demand around, okay, increase my salary, or promote me to the next level, you have to be honest. Again, the point that I made before, people can see right through your justification. So try to be honest, even if it is to do with, your judgment of the situation, or your, analysis of when someone needs to be promoted. You have to enter that conversation with that degree of humility that, look, this is my understanding, this is the situation that we are in, these are some of the internal factors, and on this occasion, unfortunately, we cannot do this. Or if you are in a position to do it, then being equally ready to do that, because you don't want to delay that recognition, because then you're putting that person at a flight risk. So I appreciate these are sensitive conversations, but and they require a degree of practice. So you may not get it right in the first go if you're having this kind of conversation for the very first time. Don't beat yourselves up if someone then decides to leave, because there is that risk of putting someone at flight risk if they don't get what they're asking for. But people also value and respect honesty and transparency. So if you give them a justification which is honest, and where they know that you're not making things up, and it's based on a solid reason, then they're more likely to buy into it. So there is no formula as such, but if you have that ecosystem in place where that decision making is based on evidence, half of your problems are solved straight away, because people know that you are relying on some kind of a system that is driving your decision making. And then the softer aspects, which are, to my mind, they're not soft, I mean, they're essential aspects when it comes to running any business, any organization, is being honest and is being transparent. And it is about respecting people, and it is also recognizing that people are there to grow, and they are there for there is an interest, a vested interest. Like, if I join an organization, I want something in return. So recognizing that, and then maybe not over promising either. So if you cannot promote someone in 6 months time, please don't make that promise in that conversation. There is that tendency of procrastinating it and saying, well, I'll let's come back and let's talk about it in 6 months time. So if you are making that promise, then just honor it as well. So it might sound basic, but it is really about handling that conversation with that combination of evidence and some of those aspects around trust, doing what you're saying, being humble about it, and also if you make a mistake, accepting that a mistake was made and then moving on from it. So I would suggest that we take that approach.
I think another situation which is quite difficult for many people when they're trying to scale a startup or grow an organization is where they've got people in positions where they're the head of division or chief executive of something or another. And as the organization scales, it's a very different role from being a 20-person organization to a 100-person organization. And one of the things I think people struggle with is like, how do you know if the person you have at the moment is right for the role that what's going to be happening in 2 years' time or 1 year's time? And how would you think about that? So obviously, it's you're hiring people for what the current role is, but you've also got to look in the future. Do you maybe need to get somebody above them? And how do you think about that in advance so that you can maybe manage expectations appropriately?
Another great question, Amar. I think you touched on the key word there, which is right for the role. Now, is someone right for the role that they're currently doing? If so, how do we know that? Are we having those regular conversations around performance, objectives, capability, potential? Whether you do that through annual appraisals or you do that through your regular one-to-ones. But there has to be that measurement of, am I doing my current role effectively, yes or no? The next thing is, do I have potential to go to the next level? Again, if we talk about potential in those conversations, and more importantly, if I have that line of sight, if I am the employee, if I have that line of sight between, yes, I'm doing my current role effectively, but I want to go to the next level, how do I go from point A to point B? What's the plan? So I think that conversation is important around where I am today, where I want to be in the future as an employee. And then the line manager, whether it's the CEO or someone next level down or whatever, the level is not important. It's that conversation which is important. And I think that responsibility sits both with the employee and the person who's responsible for the development of that employee. Uh, and again, honesty is important. Like, if someone doesn't have those qualities or that potential to go to the next level, I think it's better to let the person know that, look, you have tremendous potential, but you're not quite there yet. And this is my plan around how I can get you from this point to the next point, but it will take time. So once you have been honest with the individual around their strengths and their areas of development, you have sort of already managed the expectations to a certain extent. So if you then go out and hire someone who's above them, it wouldn't be a complete shocker to them because you've already had that honest conversation with them around their potential, but that time that they need to sort of grow into the next role. So I think measurement of performance, honest feedback on performance uh, will help. And in terms of, I think the second question was the current role versus the future role. Not everyone wants to go to the next level. So again, making that assumption around we are scaling up from a 10-person team to a 100-person team, I would say don't make that assumption that your head of marketing also wants to be your director of marketing or the chief marketing officer. Having that conversation around where do you want to be in 2 years time is, I know some people find this question a little bit you know artificial, but just having that sense of succession, like who in your head, even if it's a small team, you will know as the leader of the business who will fit into what role if someone resigns. So thinking about successors, actively thinking about what happens if X leaves. Do you have someone within the business who can take that role? Can you grow someone into that role, or do you have to go outside and find a replacement? So thinking about succession planning, and again, I'm not talking about fancy processes and bringing in a consultant to do your succession planning exercise for you. It is in your head, but giving it some thought so that you're not caught out if one of your key people leave, you should have that sense of, okay, if this person leaves, and people do leave, they will leave for better opportunities outside. Nobody signs up to stay at your organization forever. So I suppose that combination of regular performance evaluations, feedback, being honest, not misleading people to think that, okay, they are definitely going to be promoted if there is a vacancy one level above them. And also, I mean, if they are ready for the role, then managing their expectations in such a way that you keep them, and they they don't leave you for a better opportunity outside. So it is work, and I fully appreciate that this takes time from doing your core stuff, and often people don't have the time to do it, and they are time poor. But sort of carving out some time to have these conversations is important as well. And I have, in my view, effective CEOs are not people who are just delivering against organizational priorities. They are people who carve out time for their people, like they're effective people managers as well. So there has, in terms of that split, it doesn't have to be 50-50. Of course, that's for you to decide as the leader. But if you're constantly thinking about these things, at the back of your mind, if you're giving these things some time, I think you can navigate through some of these demands and these decisions around who to hire, who to keep. Do we need another layer? And if so, who goes into that layer? So it's like an active discussion that you're having with yourself. If you don't have allies within your team, if you have allies within your team, I would suggest that you keep them in the loop, because it's the diversity of thinking as well. You might approach a problem in one way, whereas your allies, your peers, might give you a suggestion that you may not have thought of. So yeah, I would say that would be how I would navigate a challenge like this.
So you've shared lots of great advice so far. Is there anything else in your mind that you think that the audience should know about how to retain the best talent that maybe we haven't covered so far?
I think I have sort of touched on the important aspects, but what I do want to say at the end, just to wrap it all up, is you know those days are gone when people were secondary to the business. Uh, People, you know, whatever you're trying to achieve as an organization, that will be delivered through your people. And if you can treat them with respect, if you can treat them as people and not as resources, I think they will appreciate it. And if you spend some time proactively thinking about that system that you have put in place for your people, I think half of your problems will be sorted, purely because you have some kind of a mechanism that takes care of your day-to-day running of the organization, because problems arise from very, very basic situations.
Thank you so much for all the advice this episode so far. We're going to move on to our quick fire questions. The first one is, who are three British Asians that you think are doing incredible work that you'd love to spotlight to our audience?
The first one is Neha Issa Brown, who wears multiple hats. She's a senior executive, she's a non-executive director, she's a trustee, and she's a woman of multiple talents. The reason why I respect her is that she has carved a place for herself. She's gone up the so-called career ladder purely on her ability, her can-do attitude, and her talent, really. So she's doing very well in the field of science and research. The second person who I really admire is Rubina Singh, who is also someone who has carved a, a, a brilliant place for herself in the climate deep tech space. I think she's with Octopus Ventures, and she's gone from strength to strength. And finally, I would like to mention about Sunil Shet. Sunil is a lawyer by profession, but he feels very, very strongly about anti-slavery. He also is the chair at Anti-Slavery International, and he's someone who I really look up to in terms of not only guidance, and he's like a mentor to me, but in terms of what he's achieved, how strongly he feels about human rights, and what he brings to the table when we have discussions around how can we tackle some of these basic human rights issues that go unnoticed. Someone I hugely respect and admire. So those would be my three people.
Awesome. So hope the audience checks them out. The next question is, how can people find out more about you and what you're up to?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So I'm on LinkedIn. Surprise, surprise. And very keen to connect with you, people who are listening to this podcast. I am very passionate about people management, as you can probably tell. Very happy to share thoughts, ideas, tips, advice around people management, and in general around creating workplaces where people feel valued, respected.
The next one is there anything that you're looking for help with right now? Is there a way that maybe somebody listening today could help you?
Yes, absolutely. I talked about curiosity and humility in this podcast, and I'm very curious as an individual. I want to broaden my horizons. I would be very open to learning more about the business side, as it were, to contribute to the business side as well. I would like to obviously build and expand my network. So, very open to connecting with people who are like minded, talk about business ideas, to solve problems, which businesses face on a day to day. I'm a problem solver. No problem is big or small. So yeah, if there is anything that we can connect around, whether it's people or business, that would be great, and I'm looking forward to it.
So thank you so much for coming on today, and thanks for sharing your advice.
Thank you for having me, Amardeep. It was brilliant. Thank you.
Hello everyone. Thank you so much for listening. It means a huge amount to us, and we don't think you realise how important you are. Because if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, if you leave us a 5-star review, it makes a world of difference. And if you believe in what we're trying to do here, to inspire, connect and guide the next generation of British Asians, if you do those things, you can help us achieve that mission, and you can help us make a bigger impact. And by doing that, it means we can get bigger guests, we can host more events, we can do more for the community. So you can play a huge part. So thank you so much for supporting us.